The young and the restless spoilers. No one in Genoa City could have predicted that the final thread unraveling from Damien Kane's life would wrap itself so violently around Lily Winters. Only hours earlier, Kane Ashby had given what appeared to be a heartfelt blessing for Damien's happiness beside Lily, swallowing his envy and presenting himself as the better man. But beneath that forced smile, Kane had already begun connecting the dots, and what he saw terrified him. The pattern of manipulation, the inconsistencies in Carter's alibi, the venomous glint in his eyes when Damien's name came up, all of it pointed to one horrifying truth. Carter had killed Damien Kane, and now, as the walls closed in, he was about to do something far more unthinkable. The moment Carter realized that Kane knew the truth was the moment everything shifted. He had tolerated Kane's suspicions before, playing coy, ducking questions, always keeping one step ahead. But once Carter discovered that Kane had begun speaking to Victor Newman and Chance Chancellor, two men who wouldn't stop until they got justice, his response was swift and calculated. He abandoned any pretense of innocence and made a desperate move that would leave the entire town shaken. Carter decided to run, but not alone. Instead, he lured Lily into a carefully set trap, using her compassion as bait. Posing as emotionally shattered over Damien's death, Carter called Lily and asked her to meet him privately to discuss a memorial, something that would honor Damien's legacy. Lily, still emotionally frayed and unaware of the full danger, agreed. She walked into the meeting space thinking she would console a friend, only to find herself face to face with a man whose mask had finally cracked. The moment she stepped through the door, Carter locked it behind her. At first, he tried to explain, claiming that he was being framed, that Kane was lying, that Victor and Chance had a vendetta against him. But Lily quickly saw through the desperation in his eyes and realized the truth: Carter wasn't a victim. He was a murderer spiraling toward his end. And she had just become his insurance policy. Kane, meanwhile, was racing against time. After receiving a tip about Lily's location from a shaken Amanda, who had intercepted a suspicious text Carter sent to Lily, Kane contacted Chance immediately. They were already tailing Carter, but Lily's sudden disappearance changed the entire calculus. Victor, learning of Nick's stabbing, a violent encounter tied to this broader spiral of chaos, offered to stay behind and manage Nick's care, urging Chance and Kane to pursue Carter without delay. The race led them into the outskirts of Genoa City, where a remote storage facility housed secrets Carter had hoped to bury. Carter, realizing that Lily's presence would soon become a liability, began to panic. His efforts to keep her calm failed. Lily, with her strength and emotional intelligence, never begged, never screamed, but her resolve terrified him more than any weapon. She asked pointed questions, reminded him of the cameras likely tracking his every movement, and spoke to him not as a hostage, but as someone who once trusted him and was now disappointed beyond measure. For a brief moment, Carter faltered, overwhelmed by the consequences of his actions. But survival outweighed remorse. He grabbed Lily, tied her hands, and began forcing her toward a service vehicle stashed nearby. That was the moment Kane arrived. With no time for strategy or backup, and with Chance still a few minutes behind, Kane stepped between Carter and the exit, his body trembling with fury and fear. Carter pulled Lily closer, a makeshift blade pressed to her throat, daring Kane to move. And Kane, for all his mistakes, manipulations, and jealous missteps, finally showed Lily exactly who he was. A man willing to risk everything to protect her. Words were exchanged, low and cold. Carter blamed Kane for everything. For Damien's growing power, for Victor's interest, for the walls that now pressed in on him. Kane, steady and composed, called him what he truly was, a coward hiding behind a woman he had no right to touch. Lily, eyes locked on Kane, mouthed something that Kane couldn't fully read, a signal, maybe, or a plea. And that was enough. In one fluid motion, Kane lunged. The struggle that followed was brutal and fast. Lily fell to the side as Kane and Carter crashed into each other, fists flying, steel clanging against concrete. Blood smeared across Carter's face as he reached for his weapon again, but Kane kicked it away just as Chance burst through the door, gun drawn and voice booming. Carter's escape attempt ended in seconds. He was restrained, screaming, wild-eyed and foaming about conspiracies and betrayal, but the only thing anyone heard was Lily's breathless gasp as she scrambled into Kane's arms. The danger was over, for now. Back at Newman Tower, Victor received word of Carter's capture as Nick was rushed into emergency surgery. The stabbing had been unexpected, a byproduct of Carter's unraveling chaos, but Victor's concern was laced with suspicion. Someone else had helped Carter escape earlier that day, someone inside. And if that someone had access to Victor's inner circle, then this wasn't over. At the hospital, Lily refused to leave Kane's side as doctors checked her over. Her wrists were bruised, her spirit shaken, but her mind was clear. She thanked Kane for saving her, but also looked him in the eye and asked the hardest question of all: did he know Carter was dangerous all along? Kane, exhausted and raw, admitted that he had suspected Carter for weeks, but hadn't wanted to say anything until he had proof, and by then, it had almost been too late. Lily didn't answer. Her silence spoke volumes. She would need time. Elsewhere, Carter's arrest became the biggest story in Genoa City. The revelation that he had murdered Damien Kane to protect a spiraling blackmail operation, one he believed Damien would expose, shocked even his former allies. Amanda, racked with guilt, admitted to having helped Carter cover up earlier financial misdeeds, not realizing he had gone as far as murder. Chance began to suspect a broader conspiracy at play. One involving shell companies and offshore accounts linked not just to Carter, but to someone far more dangerous pulling strings from the shadows. As for Nick, his survival was uncertain. The knife had pierced dangerously close to vital organs, and while Victor remained outwardly stoic, his internal rage simmered like a dormant volcano. If someone had used Carter as a pawn to hurt his son, Victor would burn down every lie in Genoa City to find them. And in the center of it all stood Kane and Lily, broken, bonded, and uncertain of what their future now looked like. Lily had seen a darkness she would never forget, and Kane had stepped into the light at the very moment when she needed him most. But even heroism could not erase betrayal, omission, or the scars Carter left behind. Their story was far from over. Genoa City had been shaken, but the aftershocks of power, trust, guilt, and vengeance were only just beginning. And in the shadow of one man's downfall, new secrets stirred, ready to explode. Lily Winters had always been a woman who trusted her instincts, but this time, her instincts had failed her. For weeks, she had believed that Kane Ashby had something to do with Damien Kane's death, a belief fueled not by logic but by pain, history, and the shadow of betrayal that still lingered from the ruins of their past. When the rumors began to swirl and Carter whispered just enough poison into her ear, Lily couldn't help but think Kane had orchestrated the chaos to eliminate his rival. But in the cold, suffocating silence of her captivity, with Carter pacing like a wild animal and muttering about failed escape plans, everything began to shift. The moment Carter turned on her, Lily saw the truth she had refused to accept. The rage in his eyes, the cold efficiency with which he secured her wrists, the trembling calculation behind every word he spat, this wasn't a man covering for a friend. This was the killer. The real one. And in that terrifying clarity, Lily's mind flooded with memories she had dismissed, Kane's quiet sorrow at Damien's death, his warnings that never quite made sense until now, and above all, his desperation to protect her even when she doubted him. She had been wrong. Deadly wrong. And now, it might be too late to make it right. Kane Ashby was already on his way. He had followed the trail Carter had left, not one of breadcrumbs but of carelessness, arrogance, and desperation. Kane had pieced together where Carter was headed by studying surveillance logs and cross-referencing abandoned estates on the outskirts of Nice. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about saving Lily, a woman he never stopped loving, even when love was no longer enough. She had been dragged into this nightmare because she had trusted the wrong man, and Kane couldn't live with himself if she paid the price for his silence, for his delay, for his mistake in underestimating Carter's madness. He knew time was running out. Carter would not keep Lily alive for long, not once she stopped being useful. The longer she was in his hands, the greater the risk that Carter would snap. The estate Carter had chosen as his hideout was surrounded by lush, overgrown hedges, ancient stone walls, and a crumbling maze, an actual labyrinth once used as a garden feature in better days. Now it was a tomb waiting to be filled. Carter had planned to use it to slip away under cover, knowing its twisting paths would slow down anyone pursuing him. But what Carter hadn't counted on was Kane catching up so quickly. As Carter dragged Lily toward the entrance to the maze, forcing her along with one hand while the other gripped the stolen pistol, a shout tore through the wind. Kane's voice, hoarse, furious, and laced with urgency, echoed across the courtyard. Carter froze, glancing back, his grip tightening on Lily's arm. She winced but didn't cry out. She knew Carter was watching for weakness. She wouldn't give it to him. Kane stepped into view, hands raised, no weapon drawn. He wasn't here for a standoff. He was here to trade his life for hers if that's what it took. He told Carter the truth, that everyone knew now, that Victor and Chance were closing in, that there was no escape left for him. But Carter's face twisted with denial. He screamed that it was all a setup, that Kane had always been the mastermind, that Lily was a fool for not seeing it sooner. He swung the pistol wildly, forcing Kane to halt mid-step. Carter's finger twitched against the trigger. Lily gasped. For one blinding second, she thought it was the end. But Kane didn't stop. Slowly, he stepped closer, eyes locked on Lily's. He told her it was okay. He told her he wasn't going to let Carter take anything else away from them. Not today. Then chaos exploded. Carter made a split-second decision, shoving Lily aside and bolting toward the maze. But Lily, regaining her balance, kicked at his leg, just enough to make him stumble. The gun wavered in Carter's grip. And Kane took his chance. He lunged, tackling Carter to the ground. The weapon skittered across the gravel. The two men wrestled, grappling, blood smearing across their clothes as fists flew. Carter managed to break free for a moment and scrambled for the pistol, fingers brushing the metal. But before he could reach it, a shot rang out, one that didn't come from Carter's hand. Chancellor had arrived. But he wasn't alone. Victor, refusing to sit idle while his son recovered from surgery, had flown in by helicopter and joined Chance in the pursuit. They had split up at the estate's perimeter, and Chance had followed the gunfire to its source. He had seen Carter go for the weapon. He had fired to protect Kane. But Carter, reacting purely on instinct, had snatched the gun in time to fire once, just once. And that bullet did not hit Kane. Lily, trying to reach them in the confusion, had stepped into Carter's line of fire. The bullet sliced past her shoulder, missing her heart by inches, and struck Chance, who had thrown himself in front of her without hesitation. The force knocked Chance off his feet. Victor stormed in seconds later, subduing Carter with brutal force. He didn't wait for backup. He didn't wait for protocol. He knocked Carter unconscious with a single punch, the sound echoing off the stone like a verdict. Lily dropped to the ground, pressing her hands against Chance's wound. Blood poured through her fingers. She screamed for help, for Kane, for someone, anyone, to do something. Kane was already tearing at his shirt, using the fabric to stem the bleeding. He kept repeating that Chance would be okay, even as his own hands shook uncontrollably. Lily, pale and trembling, kept whispering "I'm sorry," not to Chance, but to Kane, forever believing he was capable of what Carter had done. He didn't need her apology. But she needed to say it. Medics arrived within minutes, and Chance was airlifted out. His prognosis was guarded, but Victor made it clear, if Chance survived, Carter would never see daylight again. And if he didn't, Victor would ensure justice was served by any means necessary. In the aftermath, Lily stayed by Kane's side. She refused to be alone, refused to let the guilt fester in silence. She asked him why he had come, why he had risked everything when she had turned on him so completely. And Kane told her the truth, because he still loved her. Because saving her was the only thing that mattered. Because if he had lost her, nothing else would have made sense anymore. Their reunion was fragile, raw, and uncertain, built not on declarations but on survival. They had seen the worst of each other, and the worst the world could offer. And somehow, in the eye of that storm, they had found their way back to something real. But the story wasn't over. Carter, now in custody, was refusing to speak. And that silence suggested something more, someone more. Chance's investigation had uncovered encrypted communications between Carter and an unknown partner, someone with deep connections and a vested interest in silencing Damian Kane. And the money trail led back to Genoa City. There were still secrets buried beneath the surface, and Victor intended to unearth every last one. As Lily and Kane stood at Chance's hospital bedside, watching the steady rhythm of his heart monitor, they knew that this was just the beginning. What Carter had started was part of a far larger game, one they would now have to finish. Together. Or not at all.